we chose to tell a little-known story about one of the most important events in American history, which was the fight to pass the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery. And to give that complicated story its due and to explore it in as much detail as we felt it deserved, we counted on the audiences for Lincoln to supply the now universal understanding that slavery was horrific, the same way we count on the audience's awareness of the horrors of the Civil War itself, which visually occupies only a very small portion of our film. Well, we focused only on the last 4 months of Lincoln's life because we wanted to show Lincoln accomplishing something great, something really monumental, and that was abolishing slavery and ending the Civil War. However, we also wanted to show that he was a man, not a monument, and that our best hope of understanding and doing justice to this immensely complicated person was to depict him beginning and then conducting and then concluding a very, very complex action, which was the fight to pass the 13th Amendment on the floor of the House of Representatives. We hoped to locate an event that also hadn't been previously dramatized, but had very, very significant and very, very legitimately high stakes. And we also wanted to be able to include Lincoln's family dynamic, but again, only at the moments in which they actually collided with the public events that this whole story is about. Well, as to whether Lincoln was the greatest president we've ever, had in this country, Lincoln certainly guided our country through its worst crisis in its entire history, and more than any other single person, he helped the United States to survive. And we feel that in doing this, he helped the idea of democracy as a viable political system to survive. And more than any other single person, Lincoln helped end slavery. Yes, I think it could be a challenge for 2012 audiences to go back into the 19th century world in which the Democratic Party is conservative and the Republican Party is liberal and progressive. But that was actually the case in that part of the 19th century. And the pathways that both of these parties took to the present day, in which they basically traded political places, could be the subject of lots of movies and stories. It was very important for all of us making this film to avoid being cynical, to avoid cynicism. And I think it was just as important for all of us making the film to avoid hero worship, because I think you can admire someone immensely, as we admire Lincoln, without necessarily worshiping him. Yeah, there's many, many feature-length stories that could have been told and found on very nearly every page of Doris Kearns Goodwin's 800-page team of rivals. But with Doris's blessing and her full participation throughout the whole process, we decided to focus on one individual story, which was the ending of the war, the conclusion of the war, and the fight to abolish slavery through constitutional amendment. And we feel this film version of Lincoln is very true to the spirit of Doris's masterpiece. Well, I was determined to make a movie about a working president, not a posing president. Abraham Lincoln was a statesman, a highly effective military leader. He was a father, a husband, and everybody believes he was one of our country's greatest writers. And I hope our film shows how really multifaceted he was. But we basically concentrated our story on Lincoln's political skills. He was intuitively brilliant. He always took the broad view, but he never lost his own ideals, and he could almost see into the future, but he never forgot where he came from or where the country came from. And all of this was accomplished while looking always, continuously, deeply inside himself. When I got into the screenplay, it was just one of the most brilliant things I had ever read. But it was sprawling, and it was epic, and it was 9 hours long. And it was just impractical as a motion picture. Tony and I had determined to tell the story in motion picture theaters, not on television, at least in its first round. So I thought that the most compelling thing that Tony had written in the entire 550-page document was a 70-page stretch of the fight to pass the 13th Amendment on the floor of the House of Representatives. It had already passed in the Senate, but they of course needed the house. I've always been interested in telling a story of Abraham Lincoln. He's one of the most compelling figures in American history and in my life, certainly from childhood when I first was taken at I think 4 or 5 years old to see the Lincoln Memorial, and at first was terribly frightened by the immensity of the statue in the chair. And as I got closer and closer and closer, I was completely captivated. I felt by the comfort I found in looking at his visage, his face. And even white sculpture, there was a warmth and a safety. I felt really safe as a little boy looking at him. I never forgot that moment. And but when Doris told me during a Millennium Project that I was doing for CBS in the White House, and I asked her to come on my board to basically try to figure out what the last 100 years of the 20th century was like and how we could encapsulate that in a film. And I asked her what she was doing, and she said she was writing the story of the Lincoln presidency. And I immediately asked her, could I possibly, even before the book is written, reserve the movie rights. Virginia was the seat of the Confederacy, the capital of the Confederacy. It was the city in which the president of the Confederate States, Jefferson Davis, resided and basically ran the war through General Lee. We went there for many reasons, one of which was, the governor, Governor McDonnell, completely opened, the doors, gave us basically the key to the city and made it very easy for us to come there and tell the story. I wanted everybody to feel there was a real sense of authenticity on the set, where the only real imposition would be that there was a camera and there were monitors, and that would be the only real imposition on the time period. So I simply asked the actors when they came onto the set not to kibitz, not to talk about, the book they were reading or sports scores or what was happening at home with their families. Save all that when you go outside of the space we're shooting in, but to bring a kind of respect to the story we're telling. When he spoke outdoors and he spoke the Gettysburg Address at the cemetery, his voice could carry over so many thousands of people. Why everybody during the second inaugural, 50,000 gathered, could hear everything he was saying. His voice was higher than anybody ever imagines. A figure that cut through history, like, cut a swatch of greatness through history, could have had a voice that was high. We did not want to be yet again another Lincoln portrait with the low stentorial voice. We wanted Lincoln to be accurate to the way he was, the way history tells us he actually sounded. Well, the movie is really an exercise in suspense. I mean, there's a lot of suspense in the film. It could be considered in part a political thriller. When Daniel came onto the set, he was Abraham Lincoln, not just to me, but to other actors in the scene and to the entire crew. And it was a gift that he gave all of us, and it was a gift that Tony Kushner gave to him to give to all of us. I believe that Lincoln's relevant today. I've always believed that trying to make sense of what actually happened in the past always helps to shape the present. And history is always relevant in the sense that understanding how we got to where we are will help figure out where we want to go from here. But specifically, Lincoln is relevant to the present because his presidency, I think, offers the most vivid model of leadership. I've always believed that trying to make sense of what actually happened in the past always helps to shape our present, and that history is always relevant in the sense that understanding how we got to where we are will help figure out where we want to go from here. And specifically, Lincoln is relevant to today, to the present, because his presidency, I believe, offers the most vivid model of a leader, of leadership. Lincoln advocated things we hold dear today. He advocated that government can be a positive force for the good of all people. He advocated that democracy requires fairness and compassion and education, and it requires a respect for law and racial, ethnic, and religious tolerance, and sometimes a good sense of humor.